cause I'm on one.
You know, we have ones that's a Rastafari, live in the city, Kingston City, Manhattan, like I, you know. We live amongst our universal brothers and sisters, and Rastafari is for each and every one. So it's not a...
Swinging for the fences for the home run.
Habesha, Megusana, Gesta Ethiopia. Habesha, Mrs. Maya, the Farambasa. Habesha.
Even further beyond into the universe, but I've got to make it to first.
Urgent message from the 12 seers of Mount Zion. They said the black nation will be blessed by God in these days. Circle the mountain and go home. Shabbat, Mount Zion calling me.
All right, so this one is going to be another shout out to Wyndham Yasson. You know, we haven't been able to cover much of what we have been seeing here with this breakout of COVID-19 or the coronavirus, but we have to return to our soap opera, brethren, and that is Brexit. Now, we've been covering Brexit ever since Prime Minister David Cameron had stepped down, and that had brought in the new Prime Minister at the time, Theresa May, who has since stepped down. And now we have, of course, our third Prime Minister there in the UK that is actually going through the official, we can say, recognition of Brexit, and that would be Prime Minister Boris Johnson. But here from the BBC, full Brexit takes on hold amid coronavirus outbreak. And this coming from St. Patrick's Day, March 17th, 2020, out of the BBC, and reads on as such. Talks to agree to a UK-EU trade deal have been put on hold due to the coronavirus outbreak. Negotiating teams were due to resume talks on Wednesday, although a face-to-face meeting had already been ruled out due to the virus. A UK government spokesman has confirmed that the meeting will not go ahead in the way we did in the previous round. Earlier, the Foreign Secretary told MPs the Brexit transition period will not be extended due to the outbreak. On one point, the Brexit negotiator says the UK must be able to set their own laws. On the second point, trade talks, what to do or what do the UK and the EU want? On the third point, in Brexit, will it be a Canadian or an Australian ending? And in those talks are very interesting points there, but we'll touch on those after the conclusion of our reading here. So continuing on with this BBC report, the Prime Minister's negotiating team, led by David Frost, was due to meet Michel Barnier on Wednesday to continue talks on a deal to agree to the future relationship between the UK and the EU after Brexit. The UK government spokesman said both sides remain fully committed to the negotiations, and we remain in regular contact with the European Commission to consider alternative ways to continue discussions, including looking at the possibility of video conferencing or conference calls, and exploring flexibility in the structure in the coming weeks. We expect to share a draft FTA or free trade agreement alongside the draft legal text of a number of the standalone agreements in the near future, still as planned. In the first round of talks between the UK and EU, more than 200 officials split into 11 different working groups, sitting around 11 different tables in a conference center in Brussels, Belgium, discussing 11 different policy areas from the trade in goods to transport to energy to fish. Since the coronavirus worsened, the two sides looked at whether they could replicate this setup using video conferencing and speakerphones. They're giving up because it's just too difficult. But the joint statement suggests that there still might be some contact this week between the two chief negotiators. David Frost for the UK and Michael Barnier for the EU, and they're still searching for ways to hold virtual negotiations in the future. There's also a shed load of dense paperwork, 450 pages and counting, for the teams to analyze. The EU has drafted a post-Brexit trade deal proposal covering areas such as security, foreign policy, and fisheries, but much of the draft is expected to be rejected by the UK because of references to EU law. The move to postpone the talks comes after the Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab told MPs that he did not expect the Brexit transition period would need to be extended because of the virus, in response to a question from Labour MP Stephen Kinnock about whether government would request an extension to the transition period to ease the pressure on the government. Mr. Raab said negotiations could proceed. We are confident that we can get this done, and I do not think that delaying Brexit negotiations would give anyone on either side of the channel the certainty they need. And that concludes the reading, but we'll revisit these 3 points just to elaborate a bit more on what ones we're hearing there with what has been going on with Brexit since this particular virus outbreak, so on and so forth. And we'll go to the third point first. The third point that mentioned Brexit, will it be a Canadian or an Australian ending? And we'll go a little bit more into that from another BBC report for ones who, kind of maybe a little uncertain of what that actually means, or what they're hinting at, what they're alluding to or implying with that statement. And that is this. With this other report here, it mentions, then it was a reluctant acknowledgement that to get a deal done with the EU, there would have to be some friction, some customs checks, but the promise was they would be minimal. And that's minimal, speaking of Australia and also Canada. As ones would know from historical facts, Canada and Australia definitely have been historically tied to the UK or Great Britain. And what they were alluding to in that sense was a lot of the changes that will come with Brexit, will they also go into effect for Canada as well as Australia, as knowing Australia and Canada have been what you can say, in a way, semi-surrogates of the British Crown, in that sense, also former colonies, so on and so forth. And that speaks for many other places as well, but others have gained their independence and also have renegotiated their positions and also dealt with the UK government or the UK establishment and parliament in such a way now that they have solidified their positions with what you see now. So that was a very interesting point. I can say so myself, just seeing what has been going on here behind the scenes. And that definitely will be something that we will look forward to seeing roll out once our Brexit is finally coming to its completion. And even so, amid this COVID-19 coronavirus outbreak, right up under our noses as we were, being lulled to sleep for about the past 4 to 5 years, just following Brexit and the exhaustion of what has been going on in Parliament. And even so, I can say myself that the many engaging arguments there in Parliament that have gone on in the UK, though they've reached their, greatest heights, they've also reached their lowest lows as well, with much of the ones who participate there in Parliament, many of the MPs, many of the representatives of government, so on and so forth. But even with all of that, it seems that with this COVID-19 coronavirus outbreak, Brexit is nearing its completion, and ones, hopefully who have been paying attention like ourselves, more so on the outside looking in, almost missed it. So here, just updating ones, especially I and our brethren, which, we definitely took quite some interest in Great Britain's fiasco that is known as Brexit. We definitely had been checking it for quite some time, and I had to update my brother on that, and hopefully ones also, especially our listeners who tune in from the UK, a big up, and hopefully ones are taking care and taking precautions and staying safe even throughout, this whole fiasco and this debacle. But even so, Brexit seemingly negotiations are nearing completion, and had it been not for this outbreak, they probably would have been finished at this time. So we'll look to see what will continue to come as far as the outcome of many of these negotiations, and update ones as we continue on.